In exactly 17 seconds, Jasmine Crockett shattered the illusion of judicial untouchability live on national TV. One sealed envelope, two signatures, and suddenly the names Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito weren't just whispered in scandal, they were dragged into the light, ink-stained and shaking. What was in that 1991 memo that made two Supreme Court justices look like men hiding from the truth? The cameras blinked red. Live. No delay, no edits. Room 214 of the Rayburn building was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like everyone was holding their breath and didn't know why. Across the long, polished desk lined with nameplates and microphones, every lens tracked one figure as she stepped into the room. Jasmine Crockett. Her navy blue blazer cut through the air like a blade. Her heels didn't echo, but somehow you could feel each step like the tension rippling across the floor. This wasn't just another oversight hearing. This wasn't about paperwork or policy. The plaque behind her read, Ethics, Secrecy in the Supreme Court, but everyone watching knew this was about Samuel Alito and whatever Jasmine Crockett had brought to the table. Literally. She took her seat slowly without a word. The envelope in front of her was sealed in crimson wax, thick as dried blood, stamped with a 1991 date. That envelope had already been zoomed in on by 3 news outlets before she even spoke. Fox News called it a stunt. MSNBC called it a wild card. C-SPAN called it compelling. Nobody knew what was inside, but something about that wax seal screamed classified once. Weapon now. Justice Samuel Alito, seated under the soft gold crest of the judiciary, shifted. He adjusted his robe, licked his lips, and tried to look unfazed. But the moment Jasmine raised her eyes, calm, deliberate steel cut, he blinked first. "I'd like to begin," Jasmine said, "not with Dobbs. Not with your vacations funded by billionaires. But with something older." She tapped the envelope once. "Justice Alito, do you recall a case that began in October of 1991, a hearing involving Professor Anita Hill?" Alito leaned into the mic. "I assume you're referring to the Thomas confirmation. That was over 30 years ago, Representative. Surely you're not resurrecting ghosts." Jasmine didn't blink. "Not ghosts," she said. "Unfinished business." The room shifted. Reporters perked. Phones buzzed under tables. Alito gave a dry, mirthless laugh. "This is a witch hunt." "No," Jasmine said coldly, placing one hand on the sealed red envelope. "This is history knocking. What could be so dangerous that it stayed buried for 33 years until now?" The moment Jasmine Crockett broke the seal, you could feel the room exhale. Like it didn't mean to. Like even the walls had been waiting for this. She held the envelope high, its edge torn clean, and slid a folded memo onto the table like it was a blade. Cameras zoomed in. Staffers leaned forward. Alito narrowed his eyes. "It's dated November 4th, 1991, she said softly, stamped internal, from the Office of Legal Counsel. She unfolded it in front of him. No theatrics. No raised voice. Just truth laid bare. Destroy auxiliary testimonies from EEOC personnel. The words hit like a steel pipe. Typed in black ink. Underscored twice. Gasps broke across the chamber. Audible, real. One aide dropped a pen. Another whispered, "Oh my God," barely audible beneath the buzz of microphones feeding this moment to 42 million homes. Alito stiffened. That was never submitted. A working draft, never policy. Jasmine looked at him, voice steady. "But you wrote it, didn't you?" He paused. Too long. She didn't wait for the lie. This memo wasn't leaked. It was retrieved from a sealed DOJ archive, unopened since 1993. "I had it authenticated by 2 forensic document analysts. Would you like to see their signatures?" Alito's face tightened. His fingers curled. From the right side of the dais, Senator Josh Hawley cut in his sharp defensive. "This is political theater. Justice Alito has served this nation for decades. Are we now dragging up memos from 30 years ago just to smear the court?" Jasmine didn't even glance his way. "I'm not threatening justice," she said, never taking her eyes off Alito. "I'm rescuing it." The silence after that line was heavy, the kind that doesn't land, it hangs. Alito blinked once, twice. Behind him, a clerk shifted nervously in his chair. Then Jasmine slowly turned the page. "Because you see, this memo doesn't just have one signature." She lifted it by the corner. Let the bottom page dangle in full view of the chamber. There's another name, one we all know, whose signature sat beside Alito's, and why had it been hidden for 3 decades? Jasmine didn't flinch, didn't blink. She simply rotated the page, slow, deliberate, and held it up for the chamber to see. The second signature sat just below Alito's. Bold, cursive, unmistakable. Clarence Thomas. The room cracked. Reporters gasped. Phones lit up like a wildfire. CNN and interrupted programming with a red banner. Breaking 1991, cover-up alleged Alito and Thomas named. A producer behind the glass panel mouthed one word. Unbelievable. Alito sat motionless. His jaw tightened. Across the feed, Clarence Thomas, watching from remote video, froze like a man staring at his own reflection in a courtroom mirror. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice level slicing clean through the silence. 2 names, 1 document. 33 years of silence. Orchestrated. She laid the memo flat on the desk facing the camera. The crimson seal still clung to the paper's edge like blood that hadn't dried. Every eye followed her hands. Every camera zoomed in. This wasn't carelessness. This was coordination. Intentional. Tactical. Behind her, the screen flickered. One by one, images of women appeared, real victims, real cases, a waitress in Detroit, a file clerk from Atlanta, a Hill intern who vanished from the public record after 2002. Their words echoed softly beneath Jasmine's voice. They didn't just silence Professor Hill, they erased the next generation who tried to speak. Flashbacks played like old newsreels, grainy courtroom sketches, headlines long forgotten, a voice trembling into a tape recorder from a college dorm in 1998. Jasmine let the images speak for themselves. Then she turned back to the room. It started with one lie, but it didn't stop there. The lights felt hotter now. Holly whispered something off mic. The air was thick, not with noise, but with realization. Jasmine picked up the memo again, folded it carefully, and rested it like a truth finally laid to rest. Then she looked dead into the main camera lens through it, past it, as if speaking to someone who hadn't been heard in 1991. You were told no one would believe you. You told the truth anyway. And if you're watching this now, they're finally listening. What if the woman they tried to erase never stopped watching? The memo still lay between them like a loaded weapon when the screen behind Jasmine blinked to life. No introduction, no sound. Just a sudden shift in light, and then there she was. Professor Anita Hill. The room stilled, not from shock but recognition. This wasn't the return of a ghost, it was a reckoning long overdue. Hill sat against a plain gray backdrop, no government seal, no performance. Just her, the camera, and decades of unfinished truth. Her voice came low, clear. It didn't need to rise to cut deep. She looked into the lens like she had waited 33 years for this moment. They erased our voices from history, but history records everything, even silence. A ripple passed through the chamber, not a sound but a shift. Alito didn't blink, but the muscle in his jaw tightened. His hand twitched toward the microphone, then stopped. Jasmine didn't speak. She just watched him, eyes steady, arms folded, like she knew the silence would sting more than anything she could say. Hill continued. She didn't name names. She didn't have to. When I came forward, I was warned I would lose everything, that no one would believe me. But the truth doesn't need a headline. It just needs time. Time was here now. The screen faded to black. No one clapped. No one stirred. The moment stretched as if the room was waiting for time itself to catch up. On social media, her words exploded in real time. But inside the hearing room, everything felt still, heavy, alive. She remained still, letting the silence stretch, heavy, deliberate, almost sacred. Then slowly she reached beneath her stack of notes, lifted a new envelope, this one thicker, stamped, sealed, waiting. If that was just her witness, what was she holding next that could shake the court to its foundation? The new envelope still sat unopened when the chamber door creaked again. All heads turned as Jasmine looked toward the entrance, her expression unreadable. A man walked in plain suit, tightly clenched jaw, eyes that had clearly lost sleep over what was about to be said. His name echoed softly as the clerk read it aloud. Terrell Banks, former DOJ staffer, 1990 to 1994. He approached the witness table like he was walking into a confession booth. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't need to. The weight in the room had already shifted. Banks raised his right hand, swore the oath, and sat down with a breath that trembled more than his voice. I worked under then Deputy Assistant Samuel Alito. My job was document control during the Hill confirmation process. One morning in October, I was handed a file with 4 affidavits each from women who had worked with Professor Hill. They confirmed her account. Directly, clearly. His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. A week later, I was given a second instruction: shred them. No archive, no scan, no discussion. Just remove them from existence. And I did, because I was scared, because I thought it was just politics. A hush fell so deep the cameras seemed to dim. Then Banks pulled a thin, wrinkled page from his jacket. One copy, a scan. Jasmine reached forward and took it from him gently, as if the paper might burn her fingers. The signature at the bottom was redacted, but the date was there, October 13, 1991. Jasmine held it up. The press gallery surged forward. Senator Klobuchar leaned closer, eyes locked on Alito. "You swore an oath to the Constitution," she said quietly. "Not to Clarence Thomas." Alito shifted uncomfortably, pretending to take notes. But his pen never moved. Terrell wasn't finished. "I kept this one out of fear. But I'm here now because I'm tired of being afraid. I was part of burying their truth. That doesn't mean I have to stay buried with it." He placed 2 more pages on the desk. Blurred names, real signatures, evidence no one was supposed to see again. Jasmine didn't blink. Neither did the cameras. If these statements were erased without a trace, what else was destroyed before anyone even knew to look? Jasmine didn't speak right away. She let the silence settle after Terrell Banks' confession, let the weight of it breathe. Then, without looking at Alito, she reached down and lifted something heavy onto the desk. A brown evidence box, old, faded, sealed with a rusted DOJ inventory sticker, dated November 1991. 2 weeks ago, she said quietly, "This arrived at my office. No return address, no message. Just this box." She ran her fingers over the surface like she still didn't believe it was real. The label was handwritten. Internal, EEOC hearing, sealed materials. She opened it slowly. One by one, she pulled out its contents. First 3 affidavits signed, dated never submitted to the Senate. Then 2 cassette tapes marked only by initials and case codes. And finally, a single note folded tight, written in blue ink. They never buried the truth. Just misplaced it. A murmur swept the room. Hawley leaned forward, visibly tense. Klobuchar sat motionless, her eyes on the tapes. Alito had stopped pretending to take notes. His hands gripped the edge of the table like it might disappear beneath him. Flashback. Jasmine alone in her office late at night. Lamplight flickering against wood. She pushes a tape into a dusty recorder. A woman's voice begins. Broken. Sobbing. She's describing the way she was cornered in a DOJ hallway. How no one believed her. How she was warned not to speak again. Jasmine had listened to both tapes in full. Twice. Not because she doubted, but because she knew what would happen the moment America heard them. Back in the chamber, she laid one cassette on the desk, stared at it, then looked across the room at the man who'd spent decades pretending this box didn't exist. "You want to hear what justice sounds like?" She didn't yell. She didn't need to. The tape was already halfway into the player. "What happens when you press play and the highest court in the country can't stop it?" Jasmine slid the tape into the player with calm, deliberate hands. The player clicked. Then came the quiet, not the usual hush of protocol, but a fragile calm like glass, bracing for a crack. The red tally lights blinked once above the cameras. No one spoke. No one moved. The tape hissed. Then came the voice. A woman, soft but steady, carrying the weight of something she'd never been allowed to release. She recounted a night in 1991, called to a hotel room under the pretense of an informal meeting. Clarence Thomas was there, and so was another man. She described the details like she was still in that room. The dim lamp, the way Thomas smirked, the second man standing by the minibar, silent watching. The other man never touched her, but he never stopped it either. She said, "I didn't know if it was a test or a warning." The air in the chamber thickened. A woman in the audience clutched her necklace. One staffer closed her eyes. Alito sat rigid eyes darting toward the audio player like he could will it to stop. Jasmine held steady, her expression unreadable, a calm forged in fire, not fear. "You didn't just protect a predator," she said into the mic. "You stood beside him." Alito slammed his hand on the desk, voice shaking. "This is inadmissible. That tape is unverified, 30 years old and meaningless." Jasmine turned to him, voice like ice. So was Anita Hill until today. Gasps spread across the room. Journalists raised their phones without blinking. Networks switched to full-screen coverage. Alito's face flushed deep red, but the tape kept playing. The woman's breath caught. "She said I was told to forget, to be grateful it didn't go further. But I never forgot." Then silence. Jasmine reached out and stopped the tape. Her hand hovered over the player for a moment longer, like she was still feeling the echo of the woman's voice. Then she turned to the box, reached inside, and lifted the second cassette. Still sealed, still untouched. The first tape proved he watched. But what does the second tape prove? That made them lock it away for good. Jasmine didn't speak as she slid the second tape into the player. The seal snapped open with a soft, cracked brittle from decades sealed away. She pressed play and the room braced itself. No crying this time, just the low hum of a government tape recorder and the clipped voices of men who thought no one would ever hear them. The date stamped on the file, October 22nd, 1991. The voice was unmistakable. Calm, deliberate, chillingly smooth. Samuel Alito. "If we don't contain this, we lose the court for a generation." Another man asked, "What about the women backing Hill?" Alito answered without emotion, "Target them. Quietly. We don't need evidence. We just need doubt." Gasps echoed through the chamber like distant thunder. Jasmine sat still, arms folded, eyes locked forward. Alito's face flushed, but he didn't move. On the big screen behind them, CNN's banner blazed red, "DOJ tape leak Alito, heard on 1991 strategy meeting." Then came the line that made the room sink. "Start with Hill. Push his stories, plant whispers, smear her in the right places. If she breaks, the rest fall with her." Fox News suddenly cut away to a commercial break. MSNBC stayed live. C-SPAN's camera didn't even blink. The audio rolled on. Another voice asked, and the Memo. Alito's tone didn't change. "Burn it. All copies. If it ever surfaces, we say it was a draft. Nothing binding, nothing real." The silence in the room wasn't just shock, it was mourning. Mourning for how much had been erased without a trace. Jasmine leaned into her mic. Her voice came soft but sharp enough to draw blood. "You didn't just protect a system, you weaponized it. And then you lied to the world while women bled in silence." Alito looked down. His hands stayed still. But his world was shaking. The tape clicked to a stop. Jasmine reached forward, calmly removed it from the player, and placed it beside the first. She didn't need to raise her voice. The truth had already shouted. How many women lost careers, futures, dignity because of decisions made in that room, and how many of them never even knew why Jasmine stood slowly? No theatrics, no raised voice, just the weight of everything that had been said and everything that had been silenced for far too long. The tapes were stacked in front of her, the memo beside them, but now she turned away from the evidence and toward the people. She began to speak, not from notes, from memory, from the lives that never made it into headlines or hearings. A Latina janitor from El Paso. She reported her supervisor for harassment. She was fired 2 days later, told she was making trouble, told to keep her mouth shut if she wanted work again. A black intern in Baltimore, second-year law student, brilliant, until she was cornered in a courthouse stairwell. When she spoke up, her rotation was quietly canceled. She dropped out 6 months later. Jasmine's voice cracked just slightly, and still she didn't blink. She spoke of a caseworker from Oakland, a courthouse clerk in Houston, a translator in Miami. All of them women, all of them silenced, not with tape, but with shame, with bureaucracy, with men in robes who decided what counted as credible pain. Then Jasmine reached beneath the desk and pulled out a small frame, worn silver, no plaque, just a photo. She held it up for the room, for the cameras, for the nation. "This is my mother." Her voice dropped to a whisper that carried like thunder. She cleaned offices like this one, Scrubbed floors where men in ties decided who deserved justice and who could afford to be ignored. She didn't have a seat at this table, but today I brought her with me. She paused. Let it sit. Let them all feel it. You talk about tradition, precedent, neutrality, but you built an empire of silence and called it order. You cloaked it in Latin and marble, and you thought no one would ever come back for the truth. She looked at Alito, not with rage, with something colder. Resolve. History may bend toward justice, but only if someone shoves it hard enough. She placed the photo beside the tapes, then stepped back. If justice demands accountability, then who holds the robe when the robe is the problem? The room didn't breathe for a full 5 seconds after Jasmine stepped back. Then the chairperson, pale, visibly shaken, adjusted his mic and cleared his throat. His voice cracked on the first word. He called for an emergency recess. Then after a pause that seemed to last forever, he announced what no one expected to hear that day. This committee will open a formal motion for a special inquiry into the ethical conduct of Justice Samuel Alito and Justice Clarence Thomas. Effective immediately, the air shifted. Reporters bolted from the chamber. Phones rang before pockets could be reached. Senator Amy Klobuchar stood voice-sharp, steady, unshakable. I want a full bipartisan ethics investigation on the record. Every document, every ruling tied to undisclosed relationships, every vote made under the shadow of silence. Outside, the world reacted. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre was mid-sentence in her daily briefing when a reporter interrupted breaking news from the Hill. Within minutes, footage of Jasmine's speech played across every network. The West Wing canceled scheduled remarks. Social media exploded. Hashtags trended. Protesters gathered at the steps of the Supreme Court by sundown. Some held signs. Others held copies of Anita Hill's testimony. And some just stood silently, shoulders back. Faces raised, staring up at the marble facade like they were seeing it for the first time. Not as a symbol of justice, but as a place where justice had been twisted. Inside the chamber, Jasmine remained seated, calm, composed. As cameras swarmed and aides rushed to catch up, she leaned back toward her mic one last time. We're not rewriting history, she looked around, at the men who had scoffed, at the women who had cried, at the system that had waited too long to listen. We're rescuing it. She stepped away from the desk. Tapes still on the table. Her mother's photo beside them. Her silence now louder than any final word. Can this be the moment America finally stops pretending the court is untouchable? The doors closed with a soft, final thud. The marble walls of the Supreme Court chambers muffled the chaos outside. No cameras, no reporters, no witnesses. Just two men sitting in the shadows of their own legacy. Clarence Thomas leaned in first. His voice was low, bitter. I told you she'd dig. Alito didn't answer at first. His fingers tapped nervously against a legal pad that had nothing left to offer. Then he muttered, not to Thomas, not to himself, just out loud like the truth had finally sunk in. She has more than we thought. Silence settled again. Not the kind that protects power, the kind that confirms it's slipping. Thomas glanced at the window where protesters gathered just beyond the curtain. Their chants were faint but real. He didn't look scared. He looked tired, like a man who had outrun the storm only to find it waiting inside the house. In the next room, aides whispered, lawyers paced, and the Chief Justice refused to pick up his phone. Somewhere deep in the building, a shredder stopped mid-cycle. No one dared move too quickly. Not anymore. On a C-SPAN feed still running in the background, the hearing replayed on loop. And in a split-screen view, Jasmine Crockett watched from her office. Her arms were crossed, her face unreadable. No celebration, no relief. Just quiet knowing. She didn't need to see the room to know what it looked like. She had already torn the illusion down. She leaned back, letting the hum of the screen fill the silence. The robe doesn't make the man, she had said once. The choices do. Because sooner or later, power runs out of places to hide. What happens when the judges become the Judge Jasmine returned to the podium without notes, without a binder, without hesitation? The room was quieter now, not out of decorum, but because everyone knew this was the moment they'd remember. She didn't look at Alito. She didn't need to. Her eyes were on the nation. and the weight in her voice landed like a final verdict. We didn't come here to shame power. We came here to remind it what truth looks like. No applause, no sound. Just the hum of live broadcast feeds and the faint flicker of camera lights. Jasmine stood for one heartbeat longer, then stepped down. Slowly, deliberately. Every camera followed her. Every eye locked on. Outside, the crowd had doubled. Signs raised high. Faces glowing through candlelight and phone screens. They weren't chanting names, they were chanting memory. We see you. We remember. On-screen white text faded in over the Capitol steps. 3 weeks later, a formal ethics probe into Justices Alito and Thomas is launched. Subpoenas issued, public hearings announced. The highest bench in the land now under scrutiny. But Jasmine wasn't there for the aftermath. She didn't need to be. She'd already done what needed to be done. In the silence of her office, she placed her mother's photo back on the shelf. The tapes were archived, the memo secured, her braid tucked neatly over one shoulder. Not every storm ends with thunder. Some end with truth. Sometimes justice doesn't wear a robe. Sometimes she wears braids and brings receipts. What would you have done if you found that memo? Some actions aren't meant to shame power, but to remind it what truth looks like. When one woman stood up carrying her mother's memory and the voices of countless silenced others, it wasn't just a hearing, it was a reckoning. Justice doesn't always come from the bench. Sometimes it walks in with braids and quiet fire. If you held a truth that had been buried for 30 years, what would you do with it if this story shook something inside? You don't let it fade. Like share and subscribe to Hill Insights, where silence doesn't win and the truth always finds a way through. Tap the bell, because the next story might not just expose the powerful, it might empower you. Which moment made you hold your breath? Tell us in the comments. Your voice could be the one that keeps justice moving. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching. Truth isn't over. It's just waiting for someone to hear it.